On this week's podcast, I'm joined by my friend, Gabby Reece. You may have heard of her back in the late 90s to early 2000s when she was a professional volleyball player, and then she became the host of various television shows. Well, now she is the host of a very popular podcast, The Gabby Reece Show, and she's the co-founder of Layered Superfoods and the XPT Experience, which is an app and a live experience to help people to feel their best as well as to get into the best shape of their lives. So in this podcast, we talk all about her life since becoming a professional volleyball player. We talk about what she's doing now to help keep in shape, the type of diet that she's eating, what supplements she's taking, and even what type of cosmetic treatments that she's doing, as well as what skincare she's doing. So she shares with us all of her secrets to looking and feeling incredible at the age of 54. And we even talk about some interesting topics such as breath work. So let me introduce Gabby Reece. Gabby Reece is not only a volleyball legend, but she is an inspirational leader, a New York Times bestselling author, an entrepreneur, podcast host, wife, and mother. Over the last decade, Gabby has transcended from sport to becoming an international fitness and wellness expert and a podcast host. In the Gabby Reece Show podcast, Gabby gets leading health, wellness, sports, psychology, and business experts to share their most valuable and actionable information to her audience. And she has been kind enough to have me on the show twice. She's also the co-founder and co-innovator of Layered Superfood, through which Gabby has been able to take her nutrition expertise and help create delicious, plant-based, better-for-you food products that are accessible to all. Well, I am so excited to bring this podcast to you because Gabby has led such an inspirational life. She's only the age of 54, and it has been quite the journey for her. And I think she has so much that she can share, especially for women who are listening or watching this podcast. And let's say you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s. She's really got a lot of great actionable advice for you of how she has gotten to the point where she is in her life, looking and feeling absolutely incredible. So let's go ahead with my interview with Gabby Reece. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Doc. I like it that we're switching sides now. I like it.
So I've been on your podcast a couple of times, and so this is the first time you're on mine. Let's start by talking a little bit about your story. I think most people heard about you back in the late 90s, early 2000s when you were a professional volleyball player. You were a nationally known model, and then you retired from professional volleyball in 2000. Where did you go from there?
Well, I had a stepdaughter, right when I met my husband. My oldest daughter, Bella, was a baby. And then I started having my own children in my early 30s. So I had two more daughters. So between family and, we're sort of serial entrepreneurs. I joke that when you come from such small sports like volleyball and Laird's a surfer, you end up kind of by default, and hopefully you're organically interested in being entrepreneurs. So you end up kind of meddling around in businesses.
You were the host of various shows. What was it like to host MTV Sports? I know you filled in for Dan Cortez, I think, for a while, right?
Well, you have a good memory. I think what happened is that Dan created a show called MTV Sports. And I think he had an incident where he got hurt because the concept was you would go and interview athletes and then try at a kind of basic level, neophyte level, their sport. And he had an accident and he's very quick witted. So he ended up hosting and doing wraparounds. And then he was like, get someone else to do kind of the feats. And so I was always interested in doing television and talking to people and to athletes and learning about them. And so that's how I started on TV.
And then you tried your hand also at professional golf, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah. So after volleyball, I was so interested and really in love with the idea of sports. There's like an honesty within sport, even when it's brutal, that I always was really appealing to me. I always felt like you really got to know yourself in those environments, and the notion of you were fortunate to do it, but you still had to earn it. So that was always a place I really enjoyed. So I got the offer to try to get my card to play golf. And anyone who's ever played golf knows it's definitely a sport you want to start when you're young. And then, like I said, simultaneously, about a year and a half into that project, I had my second daughter. So, you're not working on your short game and you sort of need to come into that, I think, already. So I had this idea of trying to extend out my athletic career. And that was sort of an interesting pursuit.
Did you find when you decided to stop playing professional volleyball that you kind of hit a point where you look at your life and you say, what do I do now? Because I have to imagine that was a pretty big decision because, that really helped put you on the map. And to retire from that, did you get to a point where you just kind of wondered, like, what does the future hold for me? I always wonder about that with professional athletes. Professional athletes, for the most part, hit their peak when they're 20s. And if they're lucky, they can play in their 30s. It's got to be tough when you're still so young. And it's like, oh, geez, the big thing that I've done is behind me. Like, what do I do now?
Yeah, I think identity is a big thing, right? I think we're taught this really early in life versus this idea of kind of knowing who we are and then having these extensions and these ways that we express ourselves. We are taught pretty early, like, oh, you're the smart one. Oh, you're the athletic one. Oh, you're the funny one. Okay, you're the CEO. You're the volleyball player, whatever it looks like. And so the good news for me is that it was never my master plan. I think a lot of athletes from very, very early go, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z in this sport. I really fell into the sport of volleyball kind of my junior year. And then kind of a big surprise to me was offered athletic scholarships to play. This was not my grand plan. And because I fell in love with the game, and I think because I was late to it, that is why I pursued a professional career, because I really had this idea that there was so much more to learn and to do. And I wasn't burnt out and things like that. But I will say, certainly it's hard to give up something, one, that you're pretty good at, two, that people not only know you for, but give you kind of attention for, and part of your job is tied up in that. So there's a lot of that. I have to say that because volleyball itself was such a small sport, even at the highest level, beach volleyball is still a pretty small sport. I was always diversifying, right? Like you stated earlier, I was doing TV, I was writing columns for magazines. So weirdly, I think that transition was a little kinder to me because I always was doing other things. But yeah, it's always uncomfortable. And for me, the more philosophical question of, yeah, no, I'm just me, no matter what. And my value is the same. And then I have these opportunities, some public, some not, some quiet, that bring me great satisfaction. But it's sort of that reminder to do things for yourself and not get caught up into doing what the world is telling you, or that you need the approval of, strangers or things like that, but just kind of your real life.
Did you make a conscious decision then to say, hey, I'm going to enter entrepreneurship? You and Laird co-run Laird Superfoods. You've got your XPT Extreme Performance Training. You've got your podcast, The Gabby Reece Show. All of these are hugely successful. At what point then did you actually make a conscious decision that, I'm going to actually go into entrepreneurship? And with that, being a professional athlete, doing the things you did, how did you learn how to run these companies?
Well, prior to the companies that you've mentioned, which were very fortunate or do well, I can also tell you the pursuits that I followed that didn't work out. So I think first and foremost, it's recognizing that there was a lot of exploration that went down long before some of these other companies were developed. And, one thing I've learned, and it's something I really focus on now even more, is when we listen to our hearts. I'm a really analytical person, and that's fine, and it serves a purpose. I feel when we follow our heart in our lives, those whispers, the things that appeal to us that we think, oh, that kind of agrees with me. Maybe I could do that. I really find that it leads you places. I think it's important to be strategic in life, but when we are living our pursuits based on a strategy, I think a lot of times that can get us in trouble because, again, we're back to what I think I should be doing versus what I want and feel to be doing. Because I grew up in the Caribbean and even being married to Laird, who's from Hawaii, both of us, I think, do that separately from one another. It's kind of really listen to our hearts. And I believe that we just kind of followed those, and those were byproducts. Certainly after lots of failures. And by the way, for example, in the case of Laird Superfood, it's a very successful business and it is always work.
How did Laird Superfood get started? Where did the idea come from?
It was from a natural habit of Laird's. Laird is even to this day in deep pursuit of riding waves. And so he was always looking for things. A gentleman named Paul Check, who's pretty advanced and ahead of his time, I think he put ghee in Laird's coffee 25 years ago. And, you can go back to ancient practices, yak butter tea. I mean, these are not new concepts, right? But Laird would make these concoctions with coconut oil and ghee and, a whole bunch of things in his coffee, because his whole thing was, oh, I can go out and ride for 5 hours because now I have caffeine for energy for my body, but now I have fat for my brain. And he would give it to his friends. And so in 2015, after doing this for many, many years, a friend of ours who is an entrepreneur was like, people were really loving them. He thought, how hard could it be? And lo and behold, he kind of concocted the original creamer based on Laird's ingredients. And now we have greens and reds and instant product, a really great series, a great lineup of products that, kind of a natural happy accident coming from sharing with his friends.
You've been around long enough to know all the different fads that have gone through over the last 20 some years, with the low fat kick and the plant-based and keto and Atkins, and now holistic nutritionists are talking about carnivore diet. They're talking about higher protein. How has your diet changed over the years? I have to assume that your diet is very different now than it was back when you were playing professional volleyball. And how has it kind of changed over these last couple of decades?
You always hear people say this, right? Like, I wish I knew now so I could have implemented it then. And even things like avoiding inflammation or having a better recovery process when you're grinding your body out like that. I would say I've simplified my eating. We eat plants and animals, basically. That's it. And back in those days, we carbo loaded. I didn't think a bagel was particularly offensive because, it's just going to be sugar and your body's going to burn it, and versus thinking about the gluten or the process, or in fact, does it have a very high glycemic index, or any of the things that you learn later. So I think in one way, my diet is it's just very, very simple. And unfortunately, when you start learning about how foods are prepared, even in great restaurants, you end up eating probably at home more often. And having said all of that, I also, when I do travel or go out, I'm not stressed out about this stuff. I think that is actually the worst thing we can do ourselves, is get really uptight and about food. And so I do my best. I try to control it as much as I can when I'm near my house. When I go out to eat, I will sometimes ask, like, hey, what oil is this food prepared in? And just try to be as diligent as I can. I try to back away my meal as far from my bedtime as I can. If I can get that 3-hour gap, I think that really is supportive for not only good sleep, but just for a series of things. And maybe just what's really occurred to me as I've gotten older, and it's just been pointed out, and doing my own, having all these conversations with people, is being reminded, in which people long before us knew, which is food is the medicine, and not forgetting that. So I think I just focus on that element, and you have to laugh at ourselves, right? Like, we go all the way forward to just say, hey, I got to get back to old practices.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing more and more today, is understanding that there's real food, and then there's ultra processed foods, and then there's the minimally processed and everything in between. And knowing that if you can, trying to stick with the whole foods, the real food, trying to limit all the ultra processed foods. That being said, do you look back and say, geez, like, did you ever make any dietary, mistake in the past that you now look back and go, oh my gosh, what was I thinking back then?
Yeah. I used to eat a lot more pasta, and that'd be fine if you lived in Italy, maybe, and we know where the wheat comes from and things like that. And also, I've always eaten quite a lot of food. And when I played, I really ate a lot of food. I wish I hadn't eaten so much of a lot of the foods that weren't really helping me recover. And so I think that's how life works, though. I think you're meant to go through it not knowing, so you can learn for yourself what are your reasons why, versus somebody tells you. No one's ever really learned that way, right? So it's like, oh, well, how do I feel? And my stomach, I'm not bloated, or my elimination is consistent, or whatever the million things that we learn for ourselves as to, I just know I understand when I eat like this, and we are all different, I feel good. Because there might be people, like, I can eat, order meat, have high quality meat sent to me. I probably can eat more red meat than other people that I know. They don't like it as much. Maybe they have a few more vegetables on their plate. So things like that, I always encourage people to, there's kind of these basic principles, but then within that, kind of really knowing who you are.
And, there's been a lot of talk in the last several months, maybe 6 to 12 months, about menopause and the dietary changes that a lot of women are making in menopause that they were never taught before, but now is coming to light. One of the big things is protein, and making sure that you get enough protein. Have you, going through perimenopause, and I'm not sure where you are on that whole journey, but have you made specific changes to your diet knowing that you're going through that process, or you've been through that process?
Dr. Youn, the thing about me is, I will say I'm very fortunate in that I've had momentum on my side, either way, from being, pretty healthy my whole adult life, even though I could have probably done better on the nutrition. I've never been a drinker. I don't go out late. So I'm 54 now, but I came into all of this space. I still have my cycle, but you can feel the ovaries they're getting ready to sputter out. I've come into this with a lot of momentum on my side. So I have muscle mass. I have a lot of things. So I haven't really changed it that much. I really prefer to eat meat over everything, and I always have. But I don't flip out. Like, I'm 180 pounds right now. I'm probably best at 175, a little lighter, but give or take. And so if they said, hey, I'm supposed to eat 180 grams of protein a day based on my body weight, that's going to be virtually impossible. So these are the things that I'm making sure I have good fats and fiber and a good amount of protein. Again, not building a bunch of stress around it coming in. I'm not on any medication or anything like that. So I think for me, this is one area that I've been really fortunate, but I'm also sensitive to it. Like, I don't fast because I learned from Dr. Stacy Sims. A lot of the studies on fasting were done on women, and we weren't in studies until 96 or something like that. And so so I used to think, oh, I should intermittent fast more often. I don't. I'm just really diligent about what I eat, and I cut my eating time off as early as I can. But as far as long fasting, especially at this age, there's a lot of data suggesting it can wreak havoc on your hormones. Having said that, if somebody is trying to get a hold of the reins, that's what I always say. If like your eating's kind of wild and you go, hey, I'm trying to tighten it up, I think fasting is a great tool for that. They talk about weight management, or weight loss. So I think sometimes there is a place for that, but still I would just ask people to get informed, get your blood work done, check your hormones, and start from there.
On your podcast, you interview all sorts of alternative medicine physicians and health coaches and other healthcare professionals. And there's some people who don't take any supplements and they rely on their food for their nutrition. And you've had biohackers on your podcast who may take 50 to 100 pills a day. Where do you lie on supplements? And if you don't mind me asking, are there any supplements that you yourself take every day or that you recommend to your followers?
Yeah, and absolutely. And obviously I'll start the caveat, which I'm not a doctor, but for me personally, I do appreciate when someone's like, we should get it for our food. But what I know about that person is that's probably their job. So I do have friends, for example, possibly single their entire life because it's the priority for them. So I completely honor that. But if you have a woman who's there with 3 little kids or a family, that's oftentimes, I don't think, realistic. And I don't think that our soil has the nutrients. So even if people were really diligent about their eating, I think those are hard bridges to gap. So having said that, I personally I take D. I will take an omega. I will take C and a multi. And then sometimes if I get fancy, I'll take NAD or NAC and zinc. And I always take magnesium as well, just because you start to learn like, hey, it does 72 processes in the body. It seems to show up consistently as a really great supplement to take. But definitely D and magnesium and some type of fish oil has been really supportive of me. And then, I'll play around. Once in a while, I might take kind of a more out of the box supplement for a month and just see if I notice anything. I know that if we go past 2 or 3 pills, I think the drop off is at about 85% where people just get supplement fatigue. So I always encourage people to be realistic about what they think they can do consistently. And then, adaptogens. I incorporate mushrooms and adaptogens into my daily nutrition in my coffee or, in food and things like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same with you. I mean, for me, it's a multivitamin every day. It's an omega-3. I do take a daily probiotic when I remember, which sometimes, unfortunately, I don't. What do you think about collagen? Have you been taking any collagen?
I haven't. I know that C kind of is supportive of your skin. Coming from a food business, I will tell you that has been a really interesting process to learn about, is how you get collagen. And so I'm not sold on it. I love the idea of it, but I haven't really done that.
Sorry, I think the other one that you had mentioned was NAD. That's also a really interesting one that I just started taking. For those people who are listening and they haven't heard of NAD before, this is something that's relatively new as far as supplement-wise that a lot of biohackers are now taking. And the idea is that it may help with longevity, kind of fighting off some of the aging processes. Is that something that, when you have taken it, have you noticed any change in how you feel? I talked to one person, a podcaster, who was like, oh, here, let me give you mine, try it out. And I asked her, I said, when you take it, do you feel any different at all? She's like, no, not at all, but I still take it every day.
I when I do take NAD, I take True Niagen, and I feel sometimes my energy feels up. I also will feel a little bit, depending on where I am, even a little leaner with it. I've also done it, and it takes longer, and it's a different kind of commitment. I've also done the IVs. Those can take a little bit longer. But yeah, I did feel a difference. But you have to kind of do it, I think, for a while. And also, is everything in your life kind of the same? Are you going to bed at the same time? I think when people take things, it's like, how mindful are they being about when they drop this into their practice, if they're kind of keeping a baseline that's consistent so they can actually measure it?
Well, let's shift gears a little bit into skincare. And people tell you all the time how great your skin looks. That being said, you are in the sun a lot. You made your career being in the sun. Laird is a surfer, so he's in the sun all the time. How do you and Laird protect yourself from skin cancer?
I would say I'm probably more vain than Laird, but I'm in the sun less than Laird. So I'm very big about when I was in the sun, and it's measuring out. You don't want to have a toxic sunblock because that's a real thing. And so I was always really diligent, either a large molecule, zinc, you look like a ghost. And now they've gotten so good with them. So I use a sunblock shield. And the only thing is when I pool train, which we do a lot of this rigorous pool training, is I try to go earlier. So I'm not in the height of when the sun is out. And it's sort of like I'm outside when I have to be out, and then I'm inside. But one rule of thumb is just to really not be out there at that high noon hour hour. It's like go early, go later. But I do believe, and you know this better than anyone, obviously genetics plays a role in all of this. I have some family genetics that supports having better skin. My dad is from the Caribbean. My grandfather was black. My grandmother was white. I think that has supported my skin. And then, Laird has Greek in his background. Also, I have not smoked. I don't drink. This sort of idea of beauty from the inside out, I really believe that that lifestyle has supported my skin, and I get my skin checked. So I go to the dermatologist once a year and just get everything looked at. And so far, so good. But I do think like less sugar and all these things just support it. Will it avoid it altogether? Do people who have a great lifestyle have things on their skin? Yes. But between genetics and lifestyle, I think Laird and I at least got set up for some kind of success.
One of the things too you can consider, I mean, somebody like yourself and Laird, where you do, I'm assuming, a lot of traveling for business and all of that, is the United States, the sunscreens aren't so good. And there are other countries like in Korea where they've got great sunscreens. And now we're actually finding that we can purchase those and have them sent here to the United States. So that could be something too for you to try. Do you then do like a specific skincare routine, or do you kind of wing it? Is that something that you're pretty intentional about?
Yeah, I'm not a winger when it comes to my skincare. It's funny you talked about the Korean skincare. My middle daughter, who's now 20, who makes homemade bone broths from chicken feed and like the whole 9 yards. It's pretty amazing. She was really the one who got into Korean skincare because she wants to use the less harsh, less chemical ones. So I got introduced to a lot of that through her. So a couple things. I actually love I'm not going to get it right, bakuchi oil.
Bakuchi oil, peptide and bakuchi oil moisturizer.
Yeah, so I love that. And so there's a couple products that I really love. I started using a brand also called One Skin, which has really shown up to be interesting for my skin. But what I do is I don't do a ton of stuff. So meaning, for example, before I go to bed, a long day, I wash my face with a Japanese, like more like a charcoal, softer soap, really moisturizer. I can even handle oils and serums and things like that. But when I wake up in the morning, I don't wash my face again. I just rinse it with cold water. So I'm diligent about my moisturizer. I'm diligent about my sunblock. I don't use a lot of harsh things on my skin. I don't get a ton of stuff done, even though I have the desire to sometimes, so that I'm not using a lot of harsh chemicals on my skin, because we talked about this before, where your skin has its own microbiome. So how do I support that? I'm diligent, but I'm not doing a lot of stuff because I feel like my skin gets more irritated. And then I will kind of rotate and sort of try new things. So to your point, I have some Korean skincare. I have some of your moisturizer, which I really have been enjoying. And I tend to move towards things that feel there's a thoughtful and natural component versus pretty packaging and, someone's name on it.
And you spent part of your time in Hawaii, part of your time in Malibu. I mean, living in the LA area, do you feel yourself any pressure to live up to a certain beauty standard in Hollywood, like getting treatments done, getting Botox and filler? How is it for somebody who is so focused on, natural health, and you've got the podcast where it's really focused on natural and holistic health, to be living in Malibu and then to be surrounded by so many people with, huge plumped up cheeks and lips, and this being a big part of the culture in LA? How do you deal with that? And have you consider getting treatments like that?
I don't know if I've ever joked with you about it, but I said, hey, I might be that person who just gets a facelift and I'm done with it. So I haven't tried fillers. I've tried Botox a couple of times. It's not a regular practice. When I go places, my friends and I joke, like, you're the weirdo if you kind of haven't really done a bunch of stuff. Like, what's wrong? Like, And what I have come to the conclusion for me personally is, even being 6'3", I remember many years ago as a kind of in the older part of my teenage years, deciding and being okay with like, okay, you're not going to fit in. So who are you and what do you want to represent? And just do that. And also have that ability to do that for other people, right? Like have the ability to celebrate them and even honor the way they want to do it, even if it's like, I don't understand it or it's very different than the way I'm doing it. But yes, it is pretty far out. Like you go places and I mean, everything is perfect and it's perfect all the time. And my thing is like, I want to build stuff. Like I want to talk about ideas. I want to be involved in a business. I want to grow things. And I don't actually have the time or the interest, because I guess you would find the time to worry about everything is perfect. I think what I understood a long time ago is that wasn't going to solve my problems, and that probably feeling good, my physical health, feeling strong, sweating once a day, having healthy relationships, having these things that you're doing are businesses that you feel good about, that if you work hard, that actually will impact how that goes. That those were the things that were probably going to make me feel better in the long run than just everything being perfect. And I don't even know if I know how to do that.
My wife says the same thing. It's like, she's like, yeah, I never really learned how to do my makeup all that much. And I feel my wife is naturally pretty and she doesn't wear a lot of makeup. But now I've got a daughter who's 16 and she's so into makeup. And so now she's teaching my wife a lot of the stuff that she was never taught when she was my daughter's age.
Yeah. I mean, I was in the fashion business and literally worked, like there's a brand called NARS. I've worked with François NARS. There's Bobbi Brown. I worked with Bobbi Brown. Like I've been around these people and I learned how to do that. But sometimes too, it felt for me like if I went out, it's like, who are you kidding? So, my youngest daughter also is pretty savvy. She's close to your daughter's age. And that's also their culture because of TikTok and all of that. So I do watch it. But yeah, I think healthy, vibrant, shiny. I always say like, if you walk in and you see people, what do we want to call it? Their chi, do they look lively, not, shiny, not matte? For me, those are the things that I'm interested in. Then everything is just absolutely perfect.
That makes sense. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about exercise. So you're a 54-year-old former pro athlete. What do you do to keep fit?
A couple things. I still train very hard. And I developed a land training many years ago, like 15 years ago. It's not rocket science. I write a new workout with about 15 stations on it every time I do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, each one is different. I work from about 400 exercises and I call it high X. And I used to teach it for $1 in Kauai. So I'd have 60 to 100 people in my class. And so it really became a classroom because what you hear from people all the time is I have no time. I don't know what to do. I'm bored and like I can't pay attention, basically. So this was where you work on, there's cardio, there's weightlifting, there's proprioception and balance, a little bit of stretching. And so I put together this program that I do myself Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It takes about an hour. It's very rigorous, but you can modify it. So if someone can't do it as hard, as another person, you can modify it. And it has sort of a team element to it because you follow somebody or you're on a group of 2, 3, or 4, whatever. And so I do that 3 days a week. And then I do a pool training that we have developed over the last 17 years where it's underwater pool training. So you can do hypoxic training, cardiovascular exercise, ballistic training without crushing your joints. Because that's the other thing is having a strategy around movement that it's like, I can do this forever. Not, well, this will be cool for 3 to 5 years, but then I'm going to be broken. And so I think both Laird and I have the strategy of like, how can we work very hard so you have that positive stress so you can, either keep what you have, not digress too much as you get older, but not just totally wipe out your joints in the process.
And this is all part of your XPT, all of that, right? The XPT, the extreme performance training.
Yeah. So the pool is part of XPT and High X just kind of lives on its own. And people can actually do a version of that. I did kind of proof of concept with a commune. It's called commune because also if people are stuck at home or they don't have a lot of time, we did it so you can modify based on time. But my thing is like, you're never going to get around or away from the work. But I also appreciate that a lot of people were not taught about movement and it's intimidating. And then the older we get, and especially if we're female, we're like, oh, that's not for me. And when I coach people and train with people, I'm like, you're an athlete. And that just means to survive. Everybody is surviving, your families and your jobs and just doing the best you can in some way. Like if life is your sport, that's the ultimate sport. And so maybe even have someone kind of help you if people haven't initiated that. But I also understand it. It's like a teaching, right? So at 17, I was in college playing ball. So from very early, it's like you have that language.
What would you recommend for somebody who's, let's say, listening or watching today? She's female, she's in her 40s or 50s. Maybe she's never really done a whole lot of exercising. I have a lot of patients of mine who are completely sedentary and you never know it. You see, looking at them, you never know that they were. But let's say they're hearing this, let's say they're really inspired by, what you're doing. Where would be a good place for something like that to start?
I think make sure you have a community, 1 girlfriend, 2 girlfriends, 3 girlfriends that are on the same page. Because no matter who you are, myself included, times 10, you cannot do it alone. If you don't have someone that either you're meeting at a time for accountability. The other thing is, if you really know nothing about it, take a class, get it, even if it's for a short period of time, get a trainer. I know it's an added expense, but do that just so you get an understanding of not only the movements, but how to do them safely and correctly, because you don't want people going into the gym and then they hurt themselves and then they don't, want to do that again. But most importantly, beyond that is put your life on paper, okay? Especially if you have kids. Realistically, where are the windows and schedule it? Because if you don't schedule it, it will be the first thing that goes, right? I always laugh too. Women will get their nails done. They'll make their beauty appointments. They'll get their car clean and somehow they never have time to exercise. So I think schedule it like everything else, but have a couple people that are like going through the same thing that you are and they're managing it and getting it done. So on the day you're down, they inspire you. The day they're down, you're like, hey, we got this. We're going to go. And I always want to remind people, consistency is more more important than killing yourself. But we're never going to get away from it's going to take a little bit of work. You don't have to die. It doesn't have to be the worst thing ever. You don't have to hate every moment of it, but it does have to be hard a little bit and consistent. I'd rather see you get that 15-minute walk in than like, hey, I hit it hard, 1 hour a week. I'd rather consistency and scheduling and community. It's the only way. And if you have a saboteur in your house, you got to figure that out.
One of the things I try to encourage people, especially as we get older, I think it's sometimes almost as simple as just try to move in as many different ways as you can. I think that there's a tendency for so many people to say, hey, I'm just going to walk. I'll get my steps, which is great. Like, it's amazing. Get your steps. But I also feel that as we get older, there's so much more that you have to do, because if you're walking, you're only using those muscles that are propelling you forward. And those are slow twitch muscle fibers. And there's so many more muscles that you need to use, that you need to keep those fast twitch muscle fibers going. You need to keep your balance, be able to go in different directions. And so for me, when I look at it and I see, my parents aging, my in-laws and myself even, getting into my 50s now as well, it's like, try to move in as many different ways as you can, because then you're going to use as many different muscle groups as possible too. And wherever you want to start is fine, but you don't want to just keep doing the same thing every day.
I really appreciate that, because that is one of the truest things. Sometimes I'll make people when they're in my class, because I always will have things where you're working on one leg. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with that you're in this class working on one leg. This is so when you're walking out to your car, if there's ice on the ground and you start to slip, you have the ability to right yourself. It's like, these are the things that protect us and defend us for later. I've been in sports and I've been an athlete, and I understand about go fast, jump high. But if you can be independent and strong and feel pretty good and sleep well until you're just not physically here anymore, for me, that is the big, big, big win. And, not feeling good impacts every element of your life. And I interviewed a woman named Beth Lewis, and I said to her, because I'm always so curious, why can't people adhere to somehow figure out that this is a priority? How is it that they don't make this a priority? And she said the smartest thing. She said, listen, we all think we have time. Oh, I'll start next week. I'll start next month. And we don't. Like, we're here now. And by the way, if you haven't started, that's okay too, but you can start right now.
Yeah, one thing that I heard recently, which it's so simple, but to me, it made so much sense, is somebody said, spend a lot of time, instead of sitting on your couch or in your chair, sitting on the floor. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? But then the thought is like, if you're sitting on the floor, now you have to keep getting up and down. And that's something that, when I see, like, once again, my parents, my in-laws, and it's like, if you are on the ground, like having a hard time getting up at their age, then I see my ancestors, in Korea, where they didn't have chairs. Like, they sat on pillows on the floor. And when I think about my grandma before she died, when she was even in her 80s and 90s, how she would sit on the floor and be able to get up and everything like that. Sometimes it's, I think, such simple little things that we just kind of lose as a society, because I think we get so comfortable being comfortable that even doing something like that and saying, hey, you know what? Today I'm just going to sit on the floor and watch TV instead of sit on the couch can actually make a big difference as time goes on.
I think it's a very good point. I joke sometimes in Hawaii, there's a lady that lives near me, and she's from the Philippines. And when she gardens, she's in a seated squat, and she's in her 70s, no problem. You could offer me $1 million, and I couldn't. So I just think that that's a great point.
So you've seen a lot of workout fads over the years, all the different types, whether it's Zumba or Insanity, or what are some of the worst ones that you feel you've seen over the last 20, 25 years, where you think about it now and you're like, what were we thinking back then that this was the way to work out?
Sometimes for me, aerobics, the actual aerobics type class, like Zumba is great because it gets people probably also feeling happy and dancing, but there's not a ton of pounding. So that's fine. But with a lot of aerobics, let's say the 80s, there was some kind of pounding, but you're also not building muscle. And that, and I don't really know, maybe people got skinny, but I don't know what the overall benefit was. There occasionally, what I want to say is I appreciate CrossFit because it gets people gathered and there's that community aspect, but because also there's a competitive aspect, and most people don't move well in those types of exercises. Like an overhead snap and squat, 1% of the population can do that safely and correctly. I'm exaggerating. Maybe it's 5. I don't know. So my only thing with CrossFit, even though I appreciate what they're doing, and I also understand how hard it is and what, people become super athletes in certain ways with this, is I also would encourage people to not let their ego drive them and be like, well, I'm going to beat so-and-so and the WOD today, but to only do what you're able to do well and safely. So that's my kind of concern about CrossFit and even Insanity. A lot of those moves are technically, they can be rigorous. So it's just making sure whatever fad people are doing is, is that within your real range of motion based on your body type, short levers, long levers? And are you doing it because you're trying to beat somebody? Or are you doing it because that's actually safely, personally your best? And those types of things, they make me a little, not nervous, but sometimes you're like, oh, someone might get injured.
One of the interesting things that you have gotten really into lately, and something that I've learned a bit about in the last year or two, is breath work. Can you tell us what I would have to surmise that most people who are listening or watching this podcast haven't really heard about breath work? If you say, hey, are you doing breath work? They may think, oh, is that like meditation? Can you explain what breath work is and how you and Laird have used this to help both yourselves and your clients and followers?
I want to start always these conversations by saying, listen, we're excited and found ways to use it for ourselves to work and then to share it. These are ancient practices, that people have been using forever. So what happened is I was introduced and Laird was introduced to a gentleman named Patrick McCune. He wrote a book called The Oxygen Advantage. And you can even go back to what is the dentist, not Water, Weston Price, where he wrote a book on sort of undeveloped countries where their jaws are very wide, their teeth are perfectly straight, they have no cavities, and that's because their mouths, they nose breathe, their mouths are shut, and sort of the health benefits of that. So Patrick McCune had a health experience that it kind of led him down this road to say, wait a second, most of us in modern day living, we're sitting, we're mouth breathing, our jaws are collapsing, there's no room for our teeth, we get depressed, we're only chest breathing, right? So there was a sort of oh, wait, we're doing all this stuff for exercising and trying to eat well. And are we breathing correctly? And also, could we use the breath and share it as a tool that people could use anywhere for any purpose, whether it's performance, down regulating, calming down, going into your parasympathetic, revving up, going into your sympathetic, whatever it was, you could do it free. And it's the most important thing we do, right? It is the single most thing is oxygen. So there's actually an app on XPT Life where it's hey, right before bed, you have a busy mind. Okay, there's ways that if you exhale longer and you inhale, after about 2-3 minutes, you'll downregulate, right? So instead of saying, I got to calm down. No, here, put your mind on this. When we were using in the ice practice, so 7 seconds in and 7 seconds out, because once you jump in the ice, for example, your first response is, I have to get out of here. It's okay, well, we can use the breath to calm down, to use it for recovery. So we have all these different patterns, whether it's in, nose, out, mouth, or if you're going up a high mountain, high altitude, then you want to scrub some of your CO2. So it would be in one nose, out the mouth, things like that. So you will start to understand our relationship with not only our oxygen, which by the way, if we don't have the presence of CO2, which if we're mouth breathing all day, we're scrubbing our CO2. So if we can close our mouth, unless you're sprinting, sitting at your desk, now you're taking by force a longer, deeper breath into the belly and a longer exhale. What does that do? It keeps you calmer all day long. And the other thing is it keeps the level of CO2 in the system high. So any oxygen going in is getting absorbed in the tissue and the cells. So that's another important part of health. So what people don't realize is when they're mouth breathing, they're actually not getting to absorb the oxygen that is in their bloodstream into their cells and into their tissue. So there's so many easy to understand things that once you understand it, you go, oh, this is a tool for me to use that you can use it. I have a busy mind. I don't like the idea of just meditating, but I can use breath work. I'll follow, Laird will guide me through a breath work for 30 minutes. And it has been an active meditation. And it's just a very wonderful tool that whether you have 2 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 minutes, you're driving in your car, it's very, very helpful, but it's also deeply supportive of your health.
Can you tell me a bit more about your XPT app? You mentioned that you've got breathwork exercises there. So somebody, let's say, has got an exam coming up or they've got a big meeting at work. Is that something where they could do a breathwork exercise through your app to help prepare them for that?
Yes. And they even have titles that would suggest you kind of need to get ready. Think of the All Blacks, the New Zealand. Have you ever seen them? And they do the haka, a lot of Polynesian cultures.
I was in New Zealand about 6 months ago. It's pretty impressive how we saw a few of those. Yeah.
But what we don't realize is, yes, it's to intimidate your opponent and all these things. But I would guess that going way back, what that really was it was a preparation for battle through breath. So, all this big and opening breathing and energizing and sort of, so I think people have to realize everything has a real rhyme and a reason once you understand it. But even something like that is preparation. So if you have have a big meeting, that's your battle, right? And you don't have to stand there and do all this stuff, but there's ways and patterns which you can bring more air into the system and oxygenate the system and ignite and wake up the system and almost put yourself into kind of high alert versus, oh, okay, I just got to relax. I need to downregulate. So I'm going to bring it way down. So it's learning how to use the breath to go into that, let's go, or most of us need, let's calm down.
And correct me if I'm wrong, because a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between that and meditation? In general, when you're meditating, and I do a lot of meditation where I just focus on breath, if I don't always do guided meditations. But typically with meditation, you are trying to calm everything. You're trying to get everything out of your mind. You're trying to shut things out and, kind of get that parasympathetic nervous system going where everything settles down. But with breath work, you can that could be part of it, but you could also, once again, energize you and get yourself ready. And like you mentioned with New Zealand and the haka, it's the idea of using breath to help, I don't know if it'd be stimulate, but to help have your body go in the direction that you need or want it to go, and using your breath, and whether it's shallow breaths or deeper breaths, faster ones or slower ones, to go in the direction you want it to go. Is that pretty accurate explanation?
I also really appreciate meditation. It's very, very beneficial. And, I'm sure you've talked about this with the science for your brain and all of these cognitive support. I like about breath work is sometimes in meditation, it's so still that we think that that's the only time is when we're in that state or following that meditation or doing the meditation ourselves. But when you get connected to going, even being aware of, I'm only breathing into my chest. Why don't I just kind of get into a position, whether it's lay on the floor or just stand up, where I can really bring the breath down deep into the belly. I think when you have a breath practice, it just gives you a greater sensitivity to not only use the breath how you want it, get awake, alert, I'm feeling sluggish. Hey, I got to focus and go kick ass in this meeting. Boom. Okay. All right. I've had a full day and I got to take the edge off so I can get ready to go to bed. Whichever way, it becomes this tool that doesn't have to be so isolated. Like I have to sit quietly over here 20 minutes. It's like, no, this is what I got right now. I'm in the car. I'm at the desk. I'm in the stall in the bathroom before I go into the meeting, and really being able to use it as a tool. I think it's a very, very, very powerful tool. There is a woman named Belisa Vranich. She teaches for a lot of military and police and things like that. I also think she does a great job teaching people how to really figure out how to learn how to breathe down into the stomach and use the diaphragm. And you know what? Listen, I've had days, let's say if someone's traveling for work and they aren't going to get a chance to get to the gym, you do a 15-minute rigorous, for real breath work drill. Dr. Andy Galpin shared this with us once. You're breaking carbon bonds. It's work on the system. So even in that way, I believe you can support yourself with your breath, which is like, hey, I can't get to the gym today. So I'm going to sit here on the floor. I'm going to mimic my system breaking carbon bonds. And it's work, let me tell you, that can be supportive.
As I was doing my research for this podcast, I was on your website and went to the XPT website, and you've got something called the XPT Experience. And this is, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is a 3-day experience where it's like a wellness retreat, but you work your tail off to get in great shape, and doing even what you mentioned before, where you're working out in the pool and all that. I showed this to my wife and she's like, oh my gosh, this is totally up my alley. I'm a little afraid, honestly. Can you tell us a bit about the XPT experience?
So people come, like you said, it's about 2.5 days, and it's mixed with a bunch of different things. So we do pool training. We'll talk about movement and mobility and just making sure people are understanding, primal patterns and kind of new ways of training. And then there's going to be discussion around food and sort of the pillars, which this is, again, not rocket science. It's just really reminding people that you need to go to bed and have recovery. Your food is important. Your movement is important. Your hydration is important, and your community is important. All of these fundamental pillars that we all know. But I think what happens even more than that, and we'll have guest lecturers and things like that, but that people will meet other people like-minded. So I think a lot of times people see that and they go, oh, it's just a bunch of super fit people coming and, getting tortured for 2.5 days. That's not the case at all, right? We're going on hikes. We're going outside. We're reminded to be in nature at every chance that we have. So we build in all these components to sort of say, when we're talking about being well, your way, your unique way, that we don't want to forget. We don't want to forget to go outside. And we don't want to forget to have a community and visit. It's not about going into a gym and banging iron. That's child's play. That's like for amateurs. that has its place. But if you're really talking about wellness and it's about connecting with yourself, and for all of us at XPT, and I have an incredible group of people that I get to work with that are experts, it's really about putting yourself in situations that you are challenging enough, but also, again, that you're getting to re-meet yourself. And the other side of this is the coaching component. For me, if you go into an environment and people make it impossible, they're not doing their job. A good coach or guide is somebody who says, okay, you're here. Can we bring you just to the top of where you are or a little bit past what you thought you could do? For me, that is the art of leading or coaching. Not, oh, you're going to come here for 2.5 days and we're going to show you how difficult and impossible it is. That's a no-go. And by the way, if anyone listening has a trainer where they don't get you to operate just at your highest level and just beyond, they aren't actually doing their job.
Great advice. Well, I really want to thank you for joining me today. This has been very informative. I've really enjoyed our talk. Thank you so much, Gabby.
Thanks. Love you.
Well, I hope if you ever want to come to an XPT, you never have to be scared, because the whole thing is like, it'd be like if I came to your house, you're not going to torture me, right? We think all performance is just through suffering. Performance is through learning and consistency and just doing the best that we can. And some days we have better days than other days. And I hope that your listeners, because I know they're interested in taking care of themselves, don't shy away from that part of it because they think that's what it is. Because really good people in that space, that's what they do. I always love seeing you, and thanks for having me.
Real quick, when's your next XPT experience?
I think we have one in August. I don't know if there's availability in that one. The other thing is, like, you could even mess around if people, want to do an adventure with their friends, and let's say somehow the schedule will permit it, is like you go, okay, we're going to go on this hike and then we're going to take this weird class that we don't know anything about that we said. Like, I think you could even have fun and bundle together sort of a fun, like you go, okay, for this Saturday, we're going to have this weird kind of fun physical, adventure, and just do something totally different.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great. So my guest this week is Gabby Reece. You've all heard of her, and she's got a super popular podcast, The Gabby Reece Show. She's also co-owner of Layered Superfoods. She's got the XPT, which is an app. It's a live experience. Would encourage you to check her out. She's also got the website, so there's all that information you can find on the website. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Dr. Youn. It's great seeing you.
So my name is Dr. Anthony Youn, and this is the Dr. Youn Show. If you've enjoyed this podcast, if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, it definitely helps us spread the word. But otherwise, we will see you next week. And as always, remember to eat real food, use clean skincare, and auto-rejuvenate before you operate.